My labor lasted 27 hours. The nurse tried to send me home at 5 centimeters and the doctor didn't believe I was in real pain. I had always imagined that when labor started, there would be this unmistakable moment where everything felt dramatic and cinematic, like water breaking in the middle of a grocery store aisle or sharp contractions that forced me to double over instantly. But instead it began quietly at 3 in the morning with a dull ache that wrapped around my lower back and tightened across my stomach like someone slowly pulling a belt. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. I was 39 weeks and 4 days pregnant, exhausted, swollen, and already uncomfortable all the time. So discomfort did not exactly feel like breaking news. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Eric slept beside me, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, trying to decide whether what I was feeling qualified as real labor or just another false alarm designed to humiliate me in triage. The tightening happened again, then again. It was not sharp or dramatic. It was steady and deep and almost methodical. By 4 in the morning, I was timing them. 7 minutes apart, then 6, then back to 8. I told myself real labor would be consistent and organized. This felt uncertain, like my body was unsure whether it wanted to commit by 6 in the morning. I was sitting on the edge of the bed breathing through contractions that now required actual concentration. Eric woke up and immediately knew something was different because I was quiet. And I'm never quiet. He asked if it was time and I said I thought so. The drive to the hospital felt longer than it had any right to be. Every red light felt personal. The contractions were still irregular but stronger now, radiating from my back to the front in waves that stole my breath and left a trembling weakness behind. When we checked into labor and delivery, I felt strangely embarrassed, as if I were about to waste everyone's time. The nurse who took us back did not smile. She looked tired in a way that suggested she had already decided how my day would go. She asked how far apart the contractions were, and I explained that they were inconsistent but painful. She nodded in a way that felt dismissive. When she checked me, her expression barely changed. 3 centimeters. She said it like a conclusion, not information. 3 centimeters is technically early labor. 3 centimeters is the number that makes you feel foolish for showing up. She told me they would monitor for an hour. The contractions intensified during that hour, tightening my abdomen until it felt like stone and then releasing in a way that left me shaking. I gripped the side of the bed and tried not to cry because I was determined not to be dramatic. After the hour passed, she checked again. 3.5 centimeters. She shrugged slightly and said that sometimes first-time moms stall out for days. She suggested walking the halls or possibly going home to labor in a more comfortable environment. Going home felt wrong in my bones. Something inside me felt like this was progressing, even if the numbers did not impress her. Eric asked whether we could stay longer. The nurse hesitated, then said the rooms were very full and that they needed to prioritize active labor. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, forcing me forward with a low sound I could not suppress. The nurse's expression hardened slightly, as if I had confirmed something inconvenient. She said she would speak to the doctor. The doctor arrived an hour later, unhurried, scanning my chart before he even looked at me. He introduced himself quickly and asked routine questions in a tone that made it clear he believed he already understood the situation. He checked me. 4 centimeters. He said I was progressing. But slowly, he explained that hospital policy discouraged early admission unless labor was clearly established. He said going home could actually help labor move faster. The implications settled over me like fog. I was not clearly in labor. I was a borderline case. I tried to explain that the pain was intensifying, that it felt different from the Braxton Hicks contractions I had been having for weeks. He nodded politely, but with the faint air of someone indulging exaggeration. He said we could stay for observation a little longer. Another hour passed, then another. By early afternoon, I was 5 centimeters and struggling to stay upright during contractions. They had shifted from uncomfortable to overwhelming, and each one felt like it split my spine in half before crushing my abdomen. The nurse reappeared with an expression that suggested she had been expecting this to plateau. She checked me again. 5 centimeters still, she sighed. She said sometimes anxiety can slow labor. But I was not anxious, I was in pain. There is something uniquely isolating about being in extreme pain while medical professionals behave as though you are simply impatient by 4 in the afternoon. The contractions were less than 5 minutes apart and intense enough that I could not speak through them. Eric held my hand while I leaned into him, breathing in counts, trying to stay ahead of the wave before it crested and overtook me. The nurse checked again. 6 centimeters. She looked almost surprised. She said perhaps they would admit me after all. It felt like permission granted reluctantly. They finally moved us to a labor room just before evening. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt uneasy. Because even though my body was clearly progressing, the tone in the room had not changed. I was still being treated like someone who might not be quite legitimate. And that uneasy feeling would follow me into the longest night of my life. Once we were officially admitted, everything should have felt more secure. But instead the pace shifted in a way that made me feel strangely forgotten. Monitors were attached, and 4 was started, and paperwork appeared. Then everyone seemed to disappear at once. The contractions continued building, stacking on top of each other until there was barely space between them to recover. The pain had moved beyond my back and abdomen and seemed to wrap around my hips and down my thighs, a deep internal pressure that felt purposeful and unstoppable. By 9 in the evening, I was at 7 centimeters. The nurse on shift changed, and the new nurse introduced herself quickly. She began adjusting the monitors without much explanation. She seemed brisk and efficient, but there was an edge to her tone that made me feel like I was already failing some unspoken expectation. She asked about pain management. I'd hoped to labor without an epidural. But by that point, my confidence had been eroded by hours of intensity and dismissal. I asked how much longer she thought it might be. She glanced at the monitor and said, "First babies can take a very long time." That was not an answer. Another contraction overtook me, and I felt my body tremble violently through it. I began to lose my sense of time. Minutes blurred as the room felt too bright and too small at once. When she checked me again close to midnight, she paused, then she said I was 8 centimeters. Relief flooded through me. 8 meant we were almost there. But instead of encouragement, she frowned slightly and said that sometimes swelling can cause measurements to appear larger than they are. I did not understand what she meant. She said she would check again later. An hour passed and the contractions became nearly continuous. I felt pressure building lower, intense and urgent. I told her I felt like I needed to push. She said it was too early. She checked me again and said I was still 8 centimeters. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to process how something so powerful could be described as still. The doctor returned sometime after 1 in the morning. He examined me quickly and said progress had slowed. He mentioned the possibility of my body not cooperating. He suggested we might consider Pitocin to get things moving. Eric asked whether that was necessary since I had progressed from 3 to 8 naturally. The doctor said sometimes labor stalls, and that prolonged labor can increase risks. I felt trapped between 2 possibilities. My body failing on its own or medical intervention accelerating something I could barely survive already. They started. Pitocin and the contractions transformed immediately. What had been waves became collisions. There was no gradual rise and fall anymore, only sudden crushing intensity that made it impossible to orient myself. I could not breathe through them. I could not think through them. I asked for the epidural and the anesthesiologist took nearly 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes during which the Pitocin contractions stacked so tightly together that I genuinely lost track of where one ended and the next began. I remember gripping the side rail of the bed so hard my fingers cramped, and I remember Eric's face hovering in and out of focus. Pale and terrified, when the anesthesiologist finally arrived, I had to sit still through a contraction while he placed the needle. It felt impossible, but somehow it was done. Gradually, the sharpest edge of pain dulled. Pressure remained, heavy and insistent, but no longer blinding. I felt exhausted beyond anything I had ever experienced. My body had been working for nearly 24 hours. The nurse checked me again. 8 centimeters. She exchanged a look with the doctor that I could not fully interpret. Then she said something that sent a cold ripple through me. She said that if I did not reach full dilation soon, they might need to discuss next steps. There was a calmness in her tone that felt rehearsed. The doctor said sometimes first-time mothers fail to progress beyond 8 centimeters. I lay there staring at the ceiling, numb from the waist down, utterly spent, feeling as though my body had been reduced to a statistic that was not performing efficiently enough. Eric squeezed my hand as the monitors beeped steadily. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath exhaustion and medication and doubt, there was a small, furious voice insisting that something about this was wrong. The pressure continued building, and despite what they were saying, despite the numbers that refused to change, I knew we were not even close to being done up by 2 a.m. The room felt unnaturally still despite the constant hum of machines and the rhythmic rise and fall of the monitor tracing my contractions across the screen. Epidural had taken the sharp edge off the pain, but it had not removed the pressure, and that pressure had evolved into something far more primal and overwhelming than anything I had felt before. It was no longer just tightening. It was gravity pulling downward with undeniable force. I told the nurse again that I felt like I needed to push. She glanced at the monitor before looking at me. She said the numbers did not suggest I was ready. Another check. 8 centimeters. Her eyebrows drew together slightly this time, and she said swelling could be preventing further dilation. She adjusted my position and suggested we try laboring on my side with a peanut ball between my knees to help things along. I remember staring at the clock on the wall and realizing I had been in labor for nearly 23 hours. My body did not feel stalled. It felt like a volcano being told to wait politely. The pressure intensified steadily, growing sharper and more focused low in my pelvis. Even with the epidural, I could feel the relentless downward force. I began shaking uncontrollably, not from cold but from sheer physical overload. Eric kept brushing my hair back from my forehead, whispering reassurances I barely processed. His face looked pale under the fluorescent lights, his jaw tight in a way I had never seen before. Around 3 a.m, the baby's heart rate began dipping during contractions. At first the dips were subtle. The nurse repositioned me again and adjusted the monitor straps, saying it was common and not necessarily concerning. But the dips became more pronounced. Each contraction triggered a drop, followed by a slow climb back to baseline. The room shifted. The nurse's movements became quicker and more purposeful. She pressed a button and another nurse entered. They turned me from side to side, adjusted the bed, lifted my hips, placed an oxygen mask over my face. The doctor arrived shortly after, his expression controlled but noticeably sharper. He checked me again. Still 8 centimeters. He said the baby might not be tolerating labor well. He said we might need to discuss a cesarean section. The words landed heavily. After 24 hours of labor and being told I was not progressing quickly enough, after enduring Pitocin contractions that felt like being crushed from the inside out, now the train of thought was shifting to surgical inevitability. I asked the doctor if I was close. He hesitated before telling me it was difficult to say. The dips continued. Each one felt like a countdown. And yet the pressure inside me had reached an almost unbearable level. It was no longer a suggestion. It was an instinct so powerful it bordered on violent. I said again that I felt like pushing. The nurse checked me once more, but she paused longer this time. Then she said something that made my heart pound. She said there might be a small lip of cervix remaining. After hours of being stuck at 8 centimeters, suddenly there was nuance. The doctor said pushing against a cervical lip could cause swelling and delay things further. They told me not to push and to just breathe through the urge. Every fiber of my body rebelled against that instruction. Trying not to push felt like trying not to blink. The pressure intensified again and I felt something shift deep inside me, a sensation unmistakably different from anything before. It was not pain, it was movement. The baby was descending and I knew it, even if the numbers and measurements did not. Even if the staff hesitated to validate it. Another dip in heart rate made the room fill with more people. Eric's grip tightened around my hand, and I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. Real fear that this might spiral beyond control. And in that moment, Beneath exhaustion and frustration and disbelief, something inside me hardened. I had trusted every instruction so far, but my body was no longer asking permission. It was demanding action. The urge to push became overwhelming, eclipsing everything else in the room. It was no longer something I could intellectually manage. It was reflexive and absolute. The doctor repeated that I was not fully dilated. The nurse urged me to pant instead of bearing down. But my body responded to the contractions with a force that felt outside of conscious control. With the next wave, I pushed. It was not dramatic or theatrical. It was instinct. The doctor moved quickly to the end of the bed, clearly irritated but now alert in a way he had not been all night. He checked me again mid-contraction. His expression changed. The cervical lip was gone. There was no swelling barrier anymore. 10 centimeters, I was fully dilated. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and jarring. The same staff who had been discussing surgery minutes earlier were now adjusting lights, preparing instruments, repositioning the bed for delivery. No one acknowledged that I had been right. No one acknowledged that the urgency the first felt had not been hysteria or impatience. They simply transitioned to the next phase as though this had been the plan all along. I began pushing in earnest. Even with the epidural, the pressure was immense, and each push required every ounce of remaining strength. My body felt hollowed out by exhaustion. My arms trembled and my throat burned from hours of controlled breathing. The baby's heart rate continued dipping during contractions. The doctor's tone sharpened when he said we needed efficient pushes. I pushed through 3 contractions, then 4. The room grew hotter, or maybe it was just me. Sweat pooled at the base of my neck and my hair clung to my face. Eric kept counting for me, his voice shaking but steady in rhythm. The doctor said the baby was not descending as quickly as he would like. He mentioned the possibility of assistance. The word vacuum entered the chat. I felt a surge of fear so sharp it cut through exhaustion. After everything, after nearly 26 hours, the idea of instruments being introduced felt like going from 0 to 100 instantly. Another contraction built, and this time I pushed with a desperation that bordered on fury. I refused to be told again that my body was not cooperating. I refused to let the conversation shift into another intervention before giving everything. I had left. The pressure intensified beyond anything I had experienced so far. A burning sensation began, deep and stretching. The doctor said the baby's head was visible. The room became hyper-focused. Each contraction brought another round of pushing, and with each one I felt progress that no monitor could quantify. The baby's heart rate dipped again, lower this time, slower to recover. The doctor said we needed one strong push, as though that were a small request. I gathered everything left in my body, every ounce of frustration from being dismissed, every second of pain that had been minimized, every instinct that had been questioned. And I pushed with the full force of someone who had been underestimated for 27 hours. And suddenly, there was release. A rush of sensation and shift in pressure so dramatic it felt like the world tilted. The baby's head was out. The room paused for half a heartbeat. Then the rest followed in a fluid, overwhelming moment that erased everything before it. A cry pierced the room. It was sharp, alive, and defiant. The tension shattered as the monitors steadied. The staff moved quickly but without the previous edge of urgency, and as they placed my baby on my chest, slick and warm and impossibly real, I felt a wave of emotion so intense it eclipsed exhaustion, frustration, and anger all at once. But beneath that relief, beneath the overwhelming love, there remained a quiet, simmering truth. I had known. I had felt it. And if I had continued, waiting politely for permission to trust my own body, the ending might have looked very different. The room slowly exhaled, but I would never forget how close they came to not believing me. The moment the baby was placed on my chest, time fractured. For 27 hours I had been measured, monitored, assessed, doubted, repositioned, and evaluated. And yet in that single second, none of the numbers mattered anymore. The monitors still beeped, the staff still moved around us, but their presence faded to background noise as I felt the undeniable warmth of my child pressed against my skin. The crying that had filled the room moments earlier softened into small, uneven breaths. The baby's body was slick and trembling, fists curled tightly and face flushed from the effort of being born, and I remember thinking, with a strange and almost stunned clarity, that my body had known exactly what it was doing. The doctor's tone shifted completely now, measured and congratulatory. The urgency that had hovered over the room was gone. There was no more talk of surgery, no more mention of failure to progress, and no more subtle suggestions that I had misread my own instincts. Instead, there were routine motions. The cord was clamped. The baby was briefly lifted for assessment. And a nurse announced strong Apgar scores, the same baby who, minutes earlier, had supposedly not been tolerating labor well enough. The irony settled heavily in my chest. I was still shaking, but the tremors were different now. They were not from pain or adrenaline, but from the sudden release of sustained intensity. My body had been operating in survival mode for more than a full day, and now it did not know how to power down gracefully. Eric stood beside me with tears in his eyes, one hand resting lightly on the baby's back as if he were afraid even the smallest pressure might be too much. He had been steady the entire time, absorbing his own fear silently so I would not see it. But now the weight of everything that had almost happened showed plainly on his face. The doctor delivered the placenta efficiently and began stitching a small tear with clinical detachment. I barely registered it. Compared to what I had just endured, it felt insignificant. What did not feel insignificant was the quiet recalibration happening in the room. The same nurse who had repeatedly told me I was still 8 centimeters now spoke gently about how strong my pushes had been. The same doctor who had discussed the operating room only hours earlier now commented on how well my body had responded once things lined up. As though the progression had been a matter of coincidence rather than persistence. No one acknowledged that I had been told not to push. No one acknowledged how close we had come to surgical intervention based on a stalled number that had resolved the moment instinct was allowed to take over. And yet I did not feel the need to argue because the proof was breathing on my chest. The baby's heart rate stabilized completely. No more dips. The crisis that had hovered so dramatically over the room evaporated without ceremony. My body had not failed. The measurements had not captured the full story. The urgency in my bones when I said I needed to push had not been hysteria, it had been timing. The room eventually quieted. Lights dimmed slightly as the staff thinned out until it was just one nurse charting softly near the corner. For the first time since early morning, there was stillness that did not feel tense. I examined my baby's face, memorizing every detail. The tiny crease above the nose, the damp curl of hair at the crown, and the way his fingers stretched and then curled again instinctively. 27 hours of labor that ended not in an operating room, not under bright surgical lights, but exactly where my body had been trying to lead us all along. Exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket, but beneath it was something steady and unshakable. Validation. Not from the staff or the monitors, but from within. There is a strange phenomenon that happens after intense medical urgency resolves. The room returns to normal so quickly that it almost feels surreal, as though the tension had been imagined. The same walls that had witnessed whispered discussions about surgery now looked ordinary and neutral. The same monitors that had seemed ominous now emitted routine, harmless sounds. But my memory of those hours was sharp eventually. The doctor returned briefly to check on us before ending his shift. His demeanor was calm and professional, as though the previous tension had been a routine variation in an otherwise standard night. He summarized the delivery in simple clinical terms. Prolonged labor, brief fetal heart rate decelerations, and a successful vaginal delivery. He left without acknowledging how firmly he had leaned toward intervention only hours earlier, and I realized something important. There would be no dramatic apology. No admission that perhaps my instincts had been correct sooner than they were believed. The satisfaction did not come from external validation. It came from outcome, from the undeniable fact that despite being subtly dismissed at multiple stages, despite being framed as stalled, slow, or possibly uncooperative, my body had completed the process powerfully and decisively. as the sun began to rise faintly beyond the hospital window. Soft gray light filtering into the room, I felt the final emotional wave settle. The chaos had not been cinematic. It had been quiet undermining and subtle doubt. Clinical detachment layered over intense physical reality. That was what made it so frustrating. At no point had anyone been openly hostile. But at multiple points, I had been treated as though I did not fully understand my own body. And yet here we were, the monitors were removed one by one, the IV was disconnected, and the room felt softer now. Eric sat down beside me, his shoulders finally relaxing for the first time in nearly a day. He looked at me with something like awe. And I understood that he had witnessed the everything, the dismissal, the escalation, the near pivot towards surgery, and the final surge that changed everything. The birth had been chaotic, prolonged, and at moments frighteningly close to spiraling into something more invasive. But it had also revealed something fundamental. My body was not inefficient or confused. It had simply required space to finish what it had started. As the nurse helped reposition the baby for feeding, I felt an overwhelming calm settle over me. The chaos had passed. The tension had dissolved. And what remained was not anger, not resentment, not even lingering frustration. What remained was certainty. If I had allowed the narrative of failure to define those final hours, the outcome might have been very different. Instead, I trusted the unmistakable, undeniable force of instinct, and that instinct carried us across the finish line.